fired upon the people there, and they went out and got in the boat, in the ship, and fired on the town and took it down on Wall Street that represents NBC. And so they brought me in to help do that. Cahill, Gordon, Sonnet, Reindel, and Ole was the name of it.
Got it.
So that's Floyd Abrams' firm down there. And so I ended up being there to do the litigation on the right of journalists to protect their confidential news sources. So needless to say, that gave me a good standing with a lot of the investigative journalists right from the very beginning, right, coming out of Harvard Law School. And then because I had done not only the major briefs in chief for NBC on that issue in the Supreme Court, but I also did the amicus briefs for ABC and CBS and for the New York Times and the Washington Post at the Supreme Court level. So I got to know Jim Goodell, who was general counsel for the New York Times. So when they got the Pentagon Papers later that next year, I was the one that got the call from Jim Goodell. And he came over to our firm to see whether we would represent them to protect their right to publish the papers, because their law firm, Lord, Day & Lord, threatened to turn them into the FBI if they didn't if they didn't give the papers back. So I took the call from Jim Goodell. We agreed to do the Pentagon Papers case. We did that. I was one of the principal attorneys for the New York Times in that case. We won the case, got to publish all 47 volumes. And then I got recruited by Attorney F. Lee Bailey, who was the #1 criminal defense attorney in the country when the Watergate burglary took place in June of 1972. And he recruited me to come over to their firm to work on the Watergate burglary case. And so I ended up running the investigation to find out, why 3 Trafficante gunmen were in the Watergate Hotel as part of that burglary team.
Santos Trafficante.
That's how I found out. So that's how I got involved in doing the field investigation. And much to my surprise, it turned out that F. Lee Bailey turned out to be the attorney for Santos Trafficante.
Of course,
and so that we were able to sit down and have that interview with Trafficante, who explained to us the entire thing about the Watergate burglary and what its connection was to the Kennedy assassination. That was the key to the Watergate burglary. But anyway, that's a long story.
Yeah, we'll come back to all this. I'm letting you go right now.
But anyway, that was how I got involved in all of those cases right at the very beginning. And so because of those first handful of cases that I did coming directly out of Harvard Law School, I realized that what was going on behind the scenes with our government was dramatically different than what they told us about, and so I ended up going back to Harvard to do a PhD in comparative social ethics, trying to ascertain what the kind of sources were for the normative principles that guided different people in making their ethical decisions. And that was where I got recruited for the Jesuit order. That one of my professors, Professor Roger Couture, who taught the course on the theological underpinnings of human rights, came to me and said, "Look, the Jesuits are looking for a general counsel in their new national headquarters in Washington, D.C., in their public policy office, and they want to come and interview you." So I did, and ended up taking a leave of absence from doing my PhD work at Harvard. I'd already gotten my undergraduate degree from the college and studied with Henry Kissinger, foreign policy, studied, economics with John Kenneth Galbraith, and did, my sociology with David Reisman. All those folks were there at the time. Those were those kind of halcyon days.
I'll say.
And then I went on to, I said that, look, what I found out in my first 2 years out here doing these cases is that there's this whole criminal background going on of government activities. And I wanted to get an analysis of how to swim in that particular sea. So that's why I ended up going back I went over to have an interview with John Rawls, who was the head of the Department of Philosophy at Harvard, to discuss this with him. And he's the one that suggested I come back and do the PhD on comparative social ethics. So that's where I was when I got recruited by the Jesuits. And that's where I was when I got contacted right after President Carter got elected in November of 1976. When he came on board and demanded to be briefed in on the UFO issue.
So that's your first introduction to UFOs in your law career.
Yeah.
Now, were you someone who as a kid thought about that stuff, thought about life beyond? You
Sure.
did.
Oh yeah. No, it wasn't any doubt about it. And when I was like 7 years old, when I first discovered what stars are, I said, wait a second, these are like suns for other whole planetary systems. I said, so you'd sit and look up into the stars at night. And you said, look at that, all of those billions of planets going around all those stars, and just think of all those different people and beings that are there, and it started to become more and more bizarre to me how we acted toward each other down here. I started finding out about things when I got to be 7, 8, 9 years old. That that the war was going on in Korea. They had all these weird things happening all the time, and I kept saying, "Look, this doesn't make any sense. Why we would be acting like this in light of where we really are in the galaxy here." And so it all seemed rather strange to me. And so I decided that I was originally going to become an astronomer, so I could figure out what was going on. And then I realized, wait a second, that's doing a lot of math and sitting looking at old, long, photographs, these time exposure photographs of stars. I didn't think that was fun. So I decided I was going to be an astronaut. And that was prior to the launching of Sputnik and stuff. But I was going to be an astronaut, and I had heard that they had just created this new United States Air Force Academy out in Colorado, and so I was going to go there, and that's what I planned to do. And so I ended up in New York State, where I grew up, way up in northern New York. I was one of the top nominees for the senatorial appointment to the Air Force Academy back in 1963.
So what changed?
Well, when I was being interviewed by Jacob Javits, Senator Javits asked me why I wanted to be an astronaut. And I said, well, I want to be an astronaut because this is an extraordinary time in our whole human history. We're getting set to go out to the stars. We're going to get to meet all these extraordinary other civilizations. And he looked at me and said, you actually believe that there's other beings out there? And I said, well, sure. I said, you're a United States Senator. I said, you know that too. I said, you got to know that. And he was kind of totally flabbergasted that I said that to him. And he said, look, I need to be candid. I need to admit to you that I've already given the appointment, the senatorial appointment, to the son of my principal financial contributor.
There you go.
He said, look, this is the way this world really works, Danny. He said, I'll give you the nomination to the Naval Academy. I said, well, I'm not into boats.
You're like that.
I said, I'm not into boats. I'm into planes. So no. He said, you can become an astronaut from there. I said, no, look at. He said, well, you just go down. You take the congressional appointment. You can get it from the local congressman. And he said, who's your congressman? I said, actually, I told him who it was. He said, oh, I know him. He said, I'll give him a call and have him get you that appointment. But turns out that he gave the appointment to the son of the mayor of Glens Falls, who was number 7 in our congressional district. And so I said to myself, wait a second, this isn't working right. There's something wrong here with the way this stuff is functioning. I'd better go to law school. So I went to Harvard College instead, and Harvard Law School, and decided that I would come out into the world and spend some time helping to kind of retune the government a little bit, working as a lawyer. And then I realized that the government wasn't just a little bit out of tune. It was playing an entirely different song, than we've been taught. And so I ended up sort of getting trapped, as it were, spending time trying to figure out how to solve this problem. So I've been at this now for 50 years, and it's led to, most recently, my being retained to represent Lou Elizondo down in the Pentagon.
Who we just had in here as well. So I know we'll get to him for sure, and all the different things around disclosure. There's just so much on the bone to talk about, and you were on a roll there at the beginning going through the resume. I didn't want to stop you.
Those are just some of the early cases that I got involved in.
But some of the early cases you got involved in were ground shakers.
Yeah,
I mean, these were earthquakes of cases, and the first one you mentioned is the Pentagon Papers, which I feel like is something that sometimes gets a little lost in our recounting of history, but it involved Daniel Ellsberg, who just recently passed in the past couple of years.
Yes.
And can you just go through exactly what happened there for people out there who are unfamiliar?
Yeah. Well, what happened is, you back up, and I studied about this at Harvard College, the history of it, that the French, back during the imperial age, when the United States in the 1890s had decided that it was going to become a world power, They refer to this in high school history courses as the age of American imperialism. This is when we went out and took over the Hawaiian Islands and Guam and Philippines. We moved and took over huge sections of southwestern United States from Mexico. We ended up initiating the Spanish-American War, against Cuba, et cetera. There was this whole era of the American age of imperialism. And during that period, the various nation states were vying for, colonies in different parts of the world to develop their economic resources. And France actually sent a gunboat into Vietnam and came into the harbor in what later became Saigon, and ended up their French sailors got off the boat and went into town, and they were milling around and ended up getting in a fight in the marketplace and fired upon the people there. And they went out and got in the boat, in the ship, and fired on the town and took it, and then didn't know what to do with it. And so they ended up deciding France was going to keep this Indochina, this colony there, and they stayed there, trying to figure out how to make an economic go of it. Rubber trees and different pineapple plants, everything. They were trying to figure out what to do. And then when the Second World War came, the Japanese swept in and took it over. And at the end of World War II, when the Japanese were being pushed out of there, the French wanted to have the United States support them in going back in reasserting their colonial power in Indochina. And the United States ended up eventually doing that. So until 1954. And in 1954, the people in Vietnam had risen up against the French colonialists and basically mounted a war against them and drove them out and surrounded them at Dien Bien Phu back in 1954. General Giap, disassembled all the artillery and carried it on back all the way up the mountains and surrounded the Dien Bien Phu, and then rained down death on the French troops there, and then had them surrender. They set up a treaty in 1954 in Geneva to agree to allow the French to withdraw below a certain line, the 42nd parallel, with the understanding that they would then remove all their troops. In the United States, under the Eisenhower-Nixon administration at the time, thought that was a bad idea, that we ought to maintain Western influence in Indochina. And so that we moved in and set up a complete public, a puppet regime under Ngo Dinh Diem. Took him out of Columbia University as a graduate student, actually.
This is the CIA doing this?
This is the CIA. CIA, yep, did it. And that they brought in Ngo Dinh Diem, they installed him and said, there's a South Vietnamese Democratic Republic here, which had never existed.
He's wearing an I Love New York shirt.
That's right, New York Yankees baseball cap. And so they ended up starting to provide massive military funding to him and political support, and also covert operations of the CIA, being able to identify local citizen groups who didn't support this endeavor, and that they were being kidnapped and tortured and disappeared by a secret political police force in South Vietnam, which was all supported by the Central Intelligence Agency. And then one administration after another started out with the Eisenhower Nixon administration, then it went to the Kennedy administration, then it went to the Johnson administration, and all the way to the Nixon administration. All of those administrations, Republicans and Democrats alike, were just lying to the American public, trying to pretend that there was this budding democracy that was attempting to flourish in the southern tip of Vietnam. It was total horseshit, and it was just a total fascist regime there trying to take over. And so all of a sudden, the Johnson administration completely fabricated a story that our United States warships innocently patrolling the international waters around Vietnam were fired upon by Vietnamese naval forces, at the Bay of Tonkin. And it was an absolute fabrication. And then on the basis of that, ordered 500,000 United States military troops into Vietnam, and the Vietnam War was on in earnest. And we were all going into college in 1963. That I was the kind of one of the senior class of the baby boomers.
Yeah.
And we came out, and I ended up, because I didn't get to go to the Air Force Academy. You had to spend 2 years in military service at that time. It's a little strange for all of our men and women now that don't realize, you come out of high school and immediately you were raw meat, to be sent into wherever they wanted you to go.
Watching the video, guys. If you haven't already subscribed, please smash that subscribe button and check out this clip's full podcast episode by clicking here or in the description below.